Welcome to our deep dive into today's news, January 6th, 2025. A day that feels like it's ripped straight from the headlines of 5 different newspapers.
Well, you're not wrong about that. We've got a real mix today. Political shakeups, international incidents, even some bizarre happenings that are hard to categorize. It's almost like the news cycle decided to throw everything at us at once.
We're talking about Trudeau resigning Trump back in the White House and already planning mass deportations. A journalist found dead in India under mysterious circumstances. It's a lot to process, even for the most dedicated news junkies.
And that's why we're here. We're going to break down these major stories, connect the dots, and hopefully make some sense of this whirlwind of a day. So let's start with the bombshell from Canada. Justin Trudeau is out as Prime Minister.
Trudeau's resignation is definitely the political earthquake of the day. He's been such a dominant force in Canadian politics for years, so this power vacuum is going to have major ripple effects.
It's interesting, though, because it's not like there was one single scandal that brought him down. It feels more like a slow burn, declining approval ratings, economic anxieties, and some pretty public clashes within his own party. Remember, his finance minister, Chrystia Freeland, resigned just recently and didn't exactly hold back on her criticisms of his leadership.
And let's not forget Jagmeet Singh, the leader of the New Democratic Party, who'd been propping up Trudeau's minority government. He recently hinted at a potential no-confidence vote, which definitely turned up the heat.
It seems like Trudeau saw the writing on a wall and decided to step down gracefully rather than face a potential ouster. But now the question is, who fills those shoes? The race to replace him is already heating up with some familiar names, like Freeland herself being thrown around.
Freeland is definitely a strong contender. She's got the experience in international trade and finance. She was a key player in the USMCA negotiations, the agreement that replaced NAFTA, and she's not afraid to stand up for what she believes in. But there are other potential successors, each with their own strengths and weaknesses. It'll be fascinating to see who emerges as the front runner and what their vision for Canada looks like.
And it's not just about internal Canadian politics. This leadership change is going to have significant implications for Canada's relationship with the U.S., especially with, shall we say, a familiar face back in the Oval Office.
Let's talk about that familiar face. Trump is back in the White House and wasting no time in making his presence known. His plan to deport millions of undocumented immigrants is dominating the headlines and sparking intense debate.
Trump's immigration policy has always been a lightning rod, but this plan takes it to a whole new level. Calling it the largest deportation in history definitely grabs attention, but it also raises serious questions about the feasibility and the potential human cost of such a massive operation.
We're talking about a logistical undertaking of unprecedented scale. Think about the resources, the personnel, the legal complexities. It's a minefield. Plus, there's a very real possibility of families being torn apart, communities being disrupted, and people being sent back to countries they barely remember.
And to add another layer of complexity to all of this, Trump is planning to use the Alien Enemies Act, a law from 1798, to justify these deportations. Now, this is where it gets really interesting.
The Alien Enemies Act was designed for wartime, giving the president broad authority to detain and deport non-citizens deemed a threat to national security. Applying it to undocumented immigrants in this context is definitely raising eyebrows, and legal experts are already predicting a wave of lawsuits.
It's a bold and some would say reckless move that's likely to face fierce opposition. We're already seeing pushback from civil rights groups, and it's only a matter of time before this ends up in the courts. And speaking of bold moves, his former border czar, Tom Homan, is reportedly already shopping around for a country to take in all the deported migrants whose home countries won't accept them.
It seems like the Trump administration is determined to move quickly and decisively on this issue, which is definitely causing anxiety and uncertainty for millions of people. But while all this is unfolding, we have another story that's equally disturbing, but for entirely different reasons. Let's shift our focus to India, where a journalist named Mukesh Chandrakar was found dead under truly horrifying circumstances.
This case is deeply unsettling. Chandrakar was known for his investigative reporting, particularly his work exposing corruption in a road construction project. And now he's been found dead in a septic tank. The details from the autopsy are chilling: multiple head fractures, a broken neck. It's a level of brutality that's hard to comprehend.
This case is a tragic reminder of the risks that journalists face, especially those who dare to shine a light on powerful interests and expose corruption. It raises serious concerns about freedom of the press in India and the safety of those who speak truth to power.
Chandrakar's death is a huge loss for journalism and a blow to accountability, and it highlights the need for a thorough investigation to bring those responsible to justice and to ensure that other journalists can do their work without fear of reprisal.
His work and his death should not be forgotten. But while we're grappling with this horrific news from India here in the U.S., winter storm, Blair is making its presence known in a very different way.
We're talking heavy snow, sleet, freezing rain, the whole winter wonderland package. And it's causing major disruptions across the country, school closures, dangerous road conditions, and the potential for widespread power outages. Millions of people are being impacted, and it's a reminder that Mother Nature can sometimes be just as unpredictable as the news cycle.
It's definitely a good time to stay indoors and maybe stock up on some hot chocolate. But before we all hibernate for the winter, let's do a quick rundown of some other headlines that are vying for attention today.
There's a lot happening, even amidst the chaos of the storm Congress is meeting today to formally certify Trump's election win. Meanwhile, Biden is using his last days in office to try and solidify his legacy, making some last-minute policy moves and delivering speeches defending his record.
He's also trying to put some safeguards in place before Trump takes over, like that ban on offshore oil drilling he just announced. And speaking of international diplomacy, Indian Prime Minister Modi has had a busy day himself, meeting with both Satya Nadella, the CEO of Microsoft, and Jake Sullivan, the U.S. National Security Advisor.
It's a flurry of activity on multiple fronts reflecting the complex and interconnected nature of our world. But we're not done yet. Because, let's be honest, no news roundup is complete without a dose of the bizarre, and today is no exception.
We've got a real mixed bag today. Don Jr. is stirring up controversy with some questionable photos of his kids. There's a disturbing video circulating online showing a dead body being dragged with complete disregard in India. A January 6th rioter is requesting permission to attend Trump's inauguration. And Elon Musk is having an on-again, off-again public bromance with Nigel Farage.
It's enough to make your head spin. These stories might seem strange and disconnected, but they offer a glimpse into the absurdities that often coexist with the serious news of the day. It's a reminder that even amidst global events and political upheaval, there's always room for the unexpected and the bizarre.
We've covered a lot of ground in this first part of our deep dive, and it's clear that January 6, 2025 is a day that will be remembered for its dramatic twists and turns.
It certainly has been a wild ride, and we're just getting started. In the next part of our deep dive, we'll take a closer look at the potential implications of these events and explore some of the key questions they raise. Stay tuned.
Welcome back to our deep dive into the wild ride that is January 6th, 2025. We've already covered a lot of ground, but there's so much more to unpack.
You're right about that. It's like every corner of the world decided to make headlines today. But let's dive back into Canada for a moment. With Trudeau out of the picture, the race to replace him is officially on, and the list of potential contenders is a mix of the expected and the surprising.
So give us the rundown. Who are the key players vying for the top spot?
Well, as we mentioned before, Chrystia Freeland is definitely a front-runner. Her experience in international trade and finance, her role in those USMCA negotiations, and her willingness to speak her mind make her a force to be reckoned with. But she's not the only one with a shot. Melanie Joly, the current foreign minister, has held a variety of cabinet positions, giving her a deep understanding of how the government operates.
Okay. And
then there's François-Philippe Champagne, the Minister of Innovation, Science and Industry. He's been involved in everything from infrastructure projects to international trade deals, which gives him a broad perspective on the challenges facing Canada.
those are some solid contenders. Anyone else we should keep an eye on?
There are a couple of potential candidates who could really shake things up. Anita Anand, the current Minister of National Defense, would be the first Hindu woman to become Prime Minister of Canada. A historic moment. And then there's Mark Carney, who has a truly impressive resume. Former governor of both the Bank of Canada and the Bank of England. His expertise in finance and economics could be a major asset in navigating the uncertain economic waters we're facing.
It's a fascinating mix of experience, backgrounds, and perspectives. So what are the big questions hanging over this leadership race? What kind of Canada will emerge from this transition?
Well, that's the million-dollar question, isn't it? A new prime minister could mean a shift in everything from economic policy to Canada's stance on climate change to its relationship with the U.S. And don't forget the social issues at play. Canada's identity is evolving, and the next leader will have to navigate those changes carefully.
With an election likely on the horizon, the stakes are high, and Canadians are going to have some big decisions to make. But let's shift gears back to the U.S. for a moment. We need to circle back to Trump's mass deportation plan and dig a little deeper into the legal and ethical implications of what he's proposing.
It's definitely a policy that has the potential to create massive upheaval, and the fact that he's invoking the Alien Enemies Act is raising serious concerns.
Can you remind us about that act? It's not exactly dinner table conversation these days.
It's a law from 1798, a time when the U.S. was a young nation facing threats from abroad. It basically gives the president sweeping powers to detain and deport non-citizens who are considered a threat to national security. It's been used sparingly throughout history, mostly during wartime, and its application in this situation is highly controversial.
So how is Trump trying to justify using this law for mass deportations?
Well, his argument seems to be that undocumented immigrants, by their very presence, represent a threat to national security. But many legal experts believe this is a blatant misapplication of the law, stretching its intended purpose to fit a political agenda.
Hmm.
It's a move that's likely to face intense scrutiny in the courts, and the legal battles could drag on for years. But beyond the legal questions, there's the very real human cost to consider. We're talking about potentially millions of people being uprooted from their lives, families being torn apart, and a climate of fear and uncertainty gripping entire communities.
It's a situation fraught with ethical dilemmas, and the potential consequences are far-reaching. And it's not just a domestic issue. This plan could have ripple effects on the international stage, impacting America's relationships with other countries, and potentially destabilizing regions already grappling with migration challenges.
It's a complex and sensitive issue with no easy answers, but it's one we'll be following closely as it unfolds. Now, before we move on, I want to revisit that tragic story of the murdered journalist in India. It's a reminder of the dangers that some journalists face simply for doing their jobs.
Yeah.
Mukesh Chandrakar was courageously investigating corruption, and it seems like his reporting hit a nerve. The brutality of his murder is shocking, and it's crucial that the authorities conduct a thorough and impartial investigation to bring those responsible to justice.
His death is a profound loss, not just for his family and friends, but for journalism as a whole. It underscores the importance of a free press and the need to protect those who dare to speak truth to power.
It's a sobering reminder that freedom of the press is not a given, and that journalists who expose wrongdoing often pay a high price for their courage.
It's a heavy thought to carry with us as we continue to explore today's news. But we can't ignore the other stories that are shaping our world, from the political maneuverings in Washington to the diplomatic efforts taking place on the global stage. And yes, we'll even touch on some of the more, shall we say, unconventional happenings that are making headlines. We're back for the final stretch of our deep dive into January 6, 2025. It's been a day of political surprises, international intrigue, and even a few head-scratching moments that we just can't ignore.
It's true. It's days like these that remind us how quickly the world can change and how important it is to stay engaged with what's happening both close to home and around the globe.
Absolutely. But before we get too philosophical, let's touch on some of those other stories we mentioned earlier. We were talking about Biden's last-minute efforts to solidify his legacy before Trump takes the reins again.
He's definitely making the most of his final days in office. Yesterday's speech at the White House was a prime example. He spent a lot of time defending his record, highlighting his experience on the world stage, and even taking a few subtle jabs at his successor.
But it wasn't all just talk.
Right. He also made some concrete policy moves, most notably that ban on new offshore oil and gas drilling in most U.S. coastal waters.
Yeah.
It's a decision that aligns with his administration's focus on environmental protection and tackling climate change.
And predictably, the incoming Trump administration has already voiced its disapproval and vowed to reverse the ban. It looks like we're in for another round of policy whiplash as the two administrations clash over energy and environmental issues.
Yeah, it's a clear signal that the battle over climate change policy is far from over and that the energy landscape in the U.S. is likely to shift significantly under Trump's leadership. But speaking of international affairs, we also touched on Indian Prime Minister Modi's busy day of diplomacy. He met with Satya Nadella, the CEO of Microsoft, and Jake Sullivan, the U.S. National Security Advisor.
It was a day of strategic conversations for Modi, and both meetings highlight the growing importance of the partnership between the U.S. and India.
Absolutely.
What were the key themes that emerged from those discussions?
Well, the meeting with Nadella focused on technology and economic growth. They discussed Microsoft's plans for expansion in India and how technology can be a driving force for progress and development. It's a reminder of India's growing role in the global tech sector.
And the meeting with Sullivan.
Oh, right. The conversation with Sullivan, on the other hand, underscored the strategic alliance between the two countries, particularly in areas like defense cooperation and regional security. It seems Modi is laying the groundwork for a strong relationship with the incoming Trump administration, even though they might have differing views on issues like climate change.
It's a smart move considering the potential for global shifts and uncertainty in the years ahead. But let's lighten the mood a bit. We've covered some pretty heavy...
Haha! Bring on the weird news. We could all use a laugh after today's roller coaster ride.
Well, we've got Don Jr. once again making headlines for some questionable social media posts involving his kids. It seems he can't resist stirring up a bit of controversy online.
Oh boy. What did he do this time?
Let's just say the photos weren't exactly met with universal approval. Some found them inappropriate, others thought they were harmless fun. It's a classic case of the internet doing what it does best, debating and dissecting every little detail.
Leave it to Don Jr. to provide some unintentional comic relief. What else have we got?
How about a disturbing video that surfaced from India? It shows a dead body being dragged into a post-mortem house with a complete lack of respect or dignity. It's a grim reminder that even in moments of grief and loss, basic human decency should prevail.
Ugh. It's a stark contrast to the high-level diplomacy and political maneuvering we've been discussing. But it's a reminder that behind the headlines, real lives are being lived, and sometimes those lives end in ways that are both tragic and deeply unsettling. But on a slightly more absurd note, we also have a January 6th rioter who's requesting permission to attend Trump's inauguration.
You can't make this stuff up. The audacity is almost impressive.
It's certainly a bizarre request, and it's sparked a debate about the optics of allowing someone convicted of crimes related to the Capitol attack to participate in such a symbolic event. And then, of course, we have Elon Musk, never one to shy away from the spotlight. This time, he's involved in a public on-again, off-again bromance with Nigel Farage, the leader of the UK Reform Party.
Their relationship seems to be as volatile as the cryptocurrency market, with public disagreements and reversals of opinion. It's a strange and somewhat confusing spectacle to behold.
It's a reminder that even the most brilliant minds can sometimes exhibit perplexing behavior. Well, there you have it, folks. January 6th, 2025. A day crammed with high-stakes politics, international developments, unexpected tragedies, and a healthy dose of the bizarre.
We've barely scratched the surface of these complex stories, but we hope we've provided some food for thought and encouraged you to dig deeper into the issues that matter most to you.
Exactly. The world is a dynamic and ever-changing place, and it's up to each of us to stay informed, engage in critical thinking, and make our voices heard.
We'll leave you with this. Stay curious, stay informed, and stay engaged with the world around you. And remember, even on the most chaotic days, there's always something new to learn. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into a truly remarkable day. We'll be back soon to explore more of the stories that are shaping our world.